Welcome to the Gold Standard Radio Show. I'm Craig Goldenfarb, your host and the founder of GOLDLAW. We've been a personal injury law firm in West Palm Beach for 25 years. This is the show where we spotlight the individuals and organizations making a real impact in our communities. Those who embody excellence, integrity, compassion, and the gold standard in everything they do. Every week we'll sit down with game changers, difference makers, and unsung heroes who are shaping the future of Palm Beach County and beyond. Whether it's through advocacy, innovation, or service, these are the people setting the bar high and showing us what it truly means to lead with purpose. So sit back, get inspired, and let's dive into the stories that define the gold standard. Hello, everybody. This is attorney Craig Goldenfarb. I'm here with the Gold Standard Radio Show, and I have with me someone I've known a long time, Dr. Heidi Schaeffer. She's a doctor, a professor, but most importantly, I think to me, is that she's an advocate on behalf of stopping human trafficking, which is a topic that I became familiar with maybe 10, 15 years ago in Florida and joined the Human Trafficking Coalition and met Dr. Schaeffer at that time. So I'm so honored to have brought Dr. Schaeffer with us today. So good morning.
Good morning.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I've always been so inspired by your story.
Well, thank you. I am a product of an interesting childhood. We won't go into too many details, but it kind of made me an advocate for people that need a voice, and I think that inspires me every single day to do better for people that, are kind of invisible to the average population. I always wanted to help people and become a psychologist as a little kid, but eventually I got into the field of medicine in my second year of college. I was majoring in psychology, and I was required to take some sciences. And I was really fascinated by everything from anatomy to physiology, and decided that by being a doctor, I can address their medical issues as well as their mental health issues, so I can really do that mind-body interaction and make sure they were treated holistically. And that's kind of what landed me into the field of medicine.
And then how about the human trafficking world? I mean, you've been such a big advocate in Palm Beach County, Broward County, all over the place. What brought you into that world?
Well, interestingly, it was Broward County where I first heard about this. In around 2008, I went to the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition meeting, and I was just floored that this was existing, but finding out that Broward County was #1 in the state for trafficking. Palm Beach County is #3, which is our next door neighbor. A lot of our victims, as you know, go back and forth. So I just was on this mission to educate everybody, particularly my fellow clinicians. I thought it was important that they learn about it. And honestly, back then the response was kind of like, "Are you crazy? What are you talking about? Trafficking of humans?" Like they thought it was drug trafficking. And I said, "No, this is a real thing." And I was, upset because I went to a really top medical school, U of M. But unfortunately, even back then, back in the 90s, human trafficking wasn't even a term. The TVPA Act came out in 2000. I trained prior to that, so I got no education. And I realized, looking back, all the patients that I saw, especially during training, many of them were trafficking victims, and I failed to diagnose that. I still treated them, of course. I would suture their lacerations and set their broken bones and those types of things, but not realizing the full spectrum of the trafficking epidemic that I learned about being on the Broward Human Trafficking Coalition, which eventually I became a board member for like several years until I moved north into Palm Beach.
I met you many years ago, maybe could even be 10 years ago, with the Palm Beach Human Trafficking Coalition. Tell us about how it expanded to Palm Beach and your role in that.
Well, it was around before I got to Palm Beach, but once I landed here in this county, I wanted to make a difference. And I said, what kind of awareness entity is happening up here? Because Broward County obviously had a very vibrant coalition. And it was pretty small at the time, maybe 12 people at most were attending meetings. So I got involved. I became vice president, eventually president, which is when you became even more involved, which is great for me because you helped us get our designation for nonprofit status, and I appreciate you because we were all volunteers. We just wanted to give our time and talent to help these victims. But we grew that tremendously, and I think that's probably the one thing I'm proud of, that we raised awareness, that we went from maybe 12 people to an average of, what do you say, Craig? Maybe 100 to 200 people were attending each meeting, and that was a packed house. It was live. The energy was there. Everybody was talking about resources and what they could do to make a difference. And for me, that was really inspiring. And I have no doubt that when I passed the torch to my fellow board members who are still running the organization, that we're still bringing awareness and attention to this very important matter.
I think when I joined, there was an important link that I saw that there was a government entity that was formed, which was the Human Trafficking Task Force. So what was the relationship between the coalition, which I think is lay people, and then the task force?
Well, the task force is a federally funded law enforcement agency. It's out of PBSO leads it, but it's in partnership with the state attorneys and civil attorneys. Everybody in that realm is kind of involved, and that was a really important collaboration. I don't see that across a lot of counties, to be honest, so I think Palm Beach County is very blessed. Plus, PBSO in general, they really get it with this human trafficking situation. They're not all about just arresting people for prostitution. They really understand a victim-centered approach, and I've seen some wonderful things come out of that collaboration. And then the coalition side of that does the outreach and the education, because obviously police officers are dealing with life and death situations and trying to prosecute these cases at the state attorney or at the federal level, even when they work with those partners. But, who are the service providers? Who's really raising awareness? There's just such a beautiful relationship between the coalition and this task force. And I think Palm Beach County, and I've visited almost every state and almost every task force. In some ways, I feel like we are beyond blessed to have this leadership right here in our county.
Yeah, I was struck when I was attending the meetings, the relationship you had in teaching schools, teaching teachers, even kids to recognize the signs, and then going into hotels and recognizing the signs of what might be a human trafficker. If someone comes in with a young girl and rents the room for an hour, there's a problem there. And now that led to legislation in Florida where there's rules and training required at hotels. So I found that to be just a wonderful effort of the education portion, and that's why I was so impressed by the coalition.
Well, we did definitely, our mission, I guess, of that coalition is primarily awareness and education. And we've trained thousands of people from every walk of life. I would love to see that expand into other professions, but hotels were a big one. I know your firm actually goes after these sometimes, I don't want to say corrupt, but maybe complicit, or maybe they turn a blind eye to trafficking on their premises. But we need that, because there has to be justice for these victims. These people work night and day. They don't make any money. All the money is going to their pimp or trafficker. And you have some big hotel chains, who I won't mention their names, even small hotels like the ones you're talking about where you rent by the hour and half hour. We actually tried to bring forward a bill which was going to eliminate those kinds of hotel establishments. It did not go through, but we did pass the bill you're talking about in 2019, which forced hotel staff to be trained in human trafficking education so that they can't say, oh, I didn't know better. I think the justice that Gold Law brings to these victims is so important. Not every victim wants to go through the criminal courts. It's a daunting task, but I know your firm has a trauma-informed approach. You're victim-centered, and frankly, just putting it out there, I'm a fan of defense attorneys because everybody deserves a good defense. But a plaintiff's attorney who takes on these clients where they don't have the ability to pay, they come in broke with nothing. I mean, they're not even allowed to wear underwear, not to be graphic, but sex trafficking victims are denied even the basic rights of things like underwear or personal hygiene products. The fact that you'll take them on as clients and you'll try to get justice for them, I just want you to know what that means to someone who has nobody in their corner. It's really a beautiful job that you do, and the fact that you've stuck with this and you haven't gotten burned out and fled to the defense side, I really appreciate that, Craig.
Well, I think, we look at it holistically from a civil justice perspective, because the criminal justice system sometimes might disappoint a victim. The pimp, or I call it the bad guy, may end up going to jail or may end up not going to jail, or something will happen, and that re-traumatizes the victim. So I've kind of nicknamed it a second path to justice, which is that the civil side, sometimes you have to bring a case against what I call an enabling institution. And a hotel or a strip club or some place may be an enabler in the chain that led to the abuse of a young woman or a young man. So I think if we team up with the criminal side of justice and the civil side of justice, that really allows us to really help these young women or men that have been trafficked. So I just love doing it, and it's a passion for me and my firm. And, so your partnership with the legal side, which is what I do for a living, And then let's talk about your partnership with the medical professionals. We've talked about schools and hotels.
Sure.
We haven't talked about the work you do with doctors and recognizing the signs of abuse. So why don't you share with us some thoughts on that?
Sure. I just don't want to de-emphasize the role of the legal profession. I can't do my job without you guys. I can restore these, victims to at least some sort of modicum of a mental or physical health. But ultimately, I need you guys to do injunction orders. I need you to do expungement orders. I have a federal bill right now that's sitting on Grassley's desk, I believe, that will bring federal expungement relief to these victims. Because as you know, they're forced to do all sorts of things during their captivity and their slavery. It's not just turning tricks necessarily. It could be that they have to cash a bad check on behalf of the pimp, or they're required to drug deal if that pimp is also a drug dealer, which is very common. And then they get busted and they have a rap sheet a mile long, and now we're going to try to get them a job. Who's going to hire them? So I just want you to really know that the legal profession and the medical profession, we have to do this together. It's always been a team. But yeah, I mean, without going into all the details, because I can talk for 8 hours. Actually, next week I'm giving a lecture at FAU Medical School where I teach specifically on human trafficking. I don't want to get into all the, what labs you order and what x-rays and how to separate the perp from the victim. But I can tell you that, my advice to medical people and what I've been imparting, I think from day one, once I found out about this is, we are not good doctors. We are doing, if you think about the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, by ignoring a whole diagnosis like human trafficking, which is an epidemic here in Florida, we're not really doing justice for our patients. I wouldn't fail to diagnose diabetes or hypertension or coronary artery disease. I feel like this has to be in the forefront of doctors' brains, and I've been working since 2008 to do that. First, it was through educating, and I still do that, obviously, at 2 different schools, including U of M and FAU. But the other thing that I do is, I pass legislation that requires them to do it, and in 2017, we started with the nurses. They were required to do 2 hours after they graduate in order to maintain their license. In 2019, that same bill that provides for hotel staff to learn, as well as law enforcement, by the way, they're required to do 4 hours of education. We passed it for every other medical profession, from a respiratory therapist to a pharm tech to MDs like me to DOs, basically saying you have to do 1 hour to keep your license current. And actually, my current bill, we're looking at the nursing bill. We got some feedback from both nurses and the deans that it's too late to start after they graduate because they're seeing these patients just like me in medical school. I mean, we're training almost day one, at least, with supervision. And to miss the diagnosis of trafficking for all those years while you're in school is not okay. So we're moving that timeline back. We right now have a bill with Representative Robin Bartleman and Gail Harrell is our senator. So if any of you listening or care to call their offices and lend support and encourage sponsors to join this fight, it's a no-brainer. It doesn't cost anything. It just means that we move that timeline to make it more relevant, because I don't want to miss patients that are in need.
Do you think that some of the block for medical professionals was due to just feeling uncomfortable or lack of education, or you think both?
A little bit of both. I mean, my number one response when I first started this in 2008 was, again, are you crazy? What are you talking about? The second one was, we are so busy, Dr. Schaeffer, and I was like, look, I'm busy too. I'm in an ER. I'm dealing with patients crashing, from things like an MI and a PE. And do I have time for that 5-minute extra conversation with a trafficking patient? I thought it was important to make that time. And frankly, I think once people learn about it, I've seen a changing of hearts. I've seen a lot more doctors being receptive. I belong to something called the American Medical Women's Association. We were the first medical association in America to really put out what we call white paper on trafficking way back when. And we formed a committee called PATH, Physicians Against the Trafficking of Humans. And I'm now the, physician co-chair of the advocacy arm of that. But the bottom line is, we have to take a stand in medicine. Are we here to advocate for our patients, or we're just here to get a paycheck? For me, I went into the field of medicine to help people. And I think when you appeal to doctors, that side of a doctor's heart, and they say, you know what, you're right. That's why I went into it too. I know I'm burned out. I know it's a lot of workload. You're dealing with insurance. Believe me, I have some sympathy for them because we deal with a lot, from hospital administrators all the way down. But ultimately, if you can remind them of that special relationship between patients and physicians, they'll understand this is their one chance to maybe get a patient to disclose. Because where else is a victim like this ever going to talk about this horrible thing that happened to them? But they might trust someone in a white coat in the privacy of a clinic setting, or even in a ER stall, to be able to finally say, you know what, I think I'm ready. I think I need help.
That's wonderful. I wanted to actually back up a little bit because we jumped into the topic of human trafficking without really defining it. Sure. And because it's not that talked about, why don't you give us a definition of human trafficking for our listeners?
Okay, well, federally, it's the harboring, recruitment, transportation, provision thereof of forced labor. And obviously, if it involves sex trafficking, there is an exemption that if you're under the age of 18, you don't need any of the elements of force, fraud, or coercion, because by definition, you can't consent to a sexual contract. You're obviously not of age to make that decision. So that's really important that people remember that this is not a choice. And I think they confuse that sometimes with human smuggling, which is seemingly interchangeable, but there's different statutes, there's different provisions, and smuggling is a voluntary act where people want to maybe cross a border and they pay someone to do that. But trafficking is where now they're forced to do all these things and they don't get to reap the benefits of their hard work. If anything, they're put in really unsafe conditions. And ultimately, when I see them in my ERs, it's not for, a routine backache. It's for multiple injuries or multiple problems where these patients are almost at the end of their days, and I'm trying to restore them and give them some sort of hope.
So when I joined the coalition, I remember one of the first things you said was you tackled some misconceptions. Misconceptions like all of the victims are foreign born. Misconceptions like all of the victims are female. So I was surprised and delighted to hear the truth. So why don't you share a couple of those things? I fed you a few already, but
Sure.
What are the misconceptions about human trafficking?
Well, the truth is, when I give a lecture, I usually have a bunch of pictures on the screen, and I say, pick out the trafficker. And they always pick the guy in the trench coat that looks like a seedy guy. Who's the victim? It's always some poor, looking, young girl. And then who's the buyer? It's never a female. It's never like an older person or certain ethnic groups. It's just interesting. So the number one misconception is that you have to fit into some profile to be a buyer, a seller, or a victim. And the truth is it could be anybody. And it's interesting to see how often they don't pick the female, or they think you have to be uneducated. Look, I'm a victim of domestic violence. Obviously, that's different than trafficking, but I consider myself an expert in domestic violence, and yet I fell into that because you have a vulnerability. Everybody is vulnerable to trafficking as we are to DV because, they figure out where your weakness is and they exploit it. And that's really, when I gave that long-winded definition of trafficking, but they're like, oh, Dr. Schaeffer, that's very long. I'm not going to remember the TVPA language. I say, okay, it's some form of forced labor through exploitation of a vulnerability. And they figure out what it is. And these traffickers are really smart. That's the other thing. They all think they're like, the guy in the corner drug dealing. They are street smart. They know where you're hurting. Like, let's say it's you're a young girl, maybe you have poor self-esteem. They're going to latch onto you and tell you you're pretty for the first time. They'll say, I love you, which maybe they never heard before. If you're someone who needs money, hey, I got a great way to make money. You want to model for me? So I just want to remind people that there's no one profile. You can't just assume that nobody's a victim and nobody's a trafficker because they look a certain way or they make a certain amount of money or they live in a certain area.
Well, I think, my law firm handled 9 of the cases against Jeffrey Epstein. And one of the things that obviously came out was his enabler was female, his girlfriend who's now in prison. So I think that did help, actually, in a weird sort of way. That helped raise the consciousness for the public that a attractive female can be the groomer in this situation. So as awful as that situation was, I think that that actually helped educate the public. What are your thoughts on that?
100%. Ghislaine Maxwell is just as guilty as Epstein, and she was the number one recruiter because what we found through research is that if a guy approaches some girl randomly, now it's a little different. You could do it on a screen and be on the computer, and that's how they're getting to most of our kids here in Palm Beach County, by the way. But she's, approachable. She seemed like, just a motherly figure to these young girls. And the next thing you know, she's teaching them how to perform certain sex acts, and she's the recruiter. And she also eventually became the person that, made sure that they complied. It's interesting to see how automatically people assume that women can never be involved. Even my son, a true story, when he was little, I was at a playground and I purposely asked one of the fathers, hey, can you approach my son? And my son ran to me and said, Mommy, that guy's trying to talk to me. I told him no, and I ran away. I'm like, I'm really proud of you. So then I went to a mother. I said, hey, can you talk to my son and see if he'll give you any information? He's there in conversation for 10 minutes. Finally, I come over and I'm like, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, yeah, this is so-and-so, and she's a mommy like you. And it's interesting to see the bias. We have this internal bias that we think that women can't be traffickers, that they can't be recruiters. But I can't tell you how many, Craig, it's sad, but how many times I've gone into in high school and it turns out that the girl's best friend, even though she's only 15 or 16 herself, is recruiting on behalf of a pimp so that that 15 or 16-year-old doesn't have to make as high of a quota. By, bringing in other girls, that burden is lessened.
So it's almost self-protective in those situations.
It is.
And that's one of the things that the pimps take advantage of.
Agreed.
So if, everybody's got their own best interest at heart. So sometimes it's coerced, someone who's being coerced to coerce others.
Correct. And that's
Wow.
that's a hard part, too, because sometimes when you look at some of these penalties, which I'm in favor of the harshest penalties, that ultimately I would like to have a difference of level, which is hard to assess, because what do you do with a girl like that that's 15 who's been trafficked for years and is told you better bring in some other girls in order, so that they can, so are they equally as guilty as the main pimp who's been doing this for years and terrorizing multiple people? It's a really slippery slope, but at the end of the day, I feel like trafficking is wrong. And it's our job to stand up for every single victim and go after all their perpetrators. But it is heartbreaking to know that somebody felt that they didn't have a choice. And if you argue that those 15-year-olds were coerced and duped by their own pimp, then anything they did in that vein should sort of be forgivable, which is why the expungement law sort of comes into play.
What other legislation are you working on, both at the state and the federal level currently?
Well, the main one is the nursing bill at the state level, the expungement law at the federal level. I want to see that enacted because Florida's, by the way, one of the greatest states for laws related to trafficking. I don't know if you're familiar with Shared Hope International, but they do domestic minor sex trafficking report cards every year. Florida consistently ranks the highest, which is really impressive out of 50 states. Obviously, I would love to see more legislation involving other professions. Why are cosmetologists not being screened with human trafficking indicators, considering they're working on the hair and the nails of all these sex trafficked women and boys? I mean, frankly, they're doing everything to make these girls look pretty to be bought and sold, so to speak. Why are they not educated? Or realtors, which are definitely involved during like the Super Bowl and NASCAR, and now World Cup is going to be coming here. It brings a lot of people that want to buy everything from, teenage girls to infant boys, and somebody will supply that. But they're being brought to these houses and paying cash, and there's locked rooms. And why do you need 16 rooms at a Super Bowl event? Do you really need that many? So I would love to see that expand to other professions. You've been educated, I've been educated, but certainly there's a lot of professions that have fallen through the cracks. I am working on some domestic violence legislation, which also parallels with human trafficking, because you ask these sex trafficking victims, how would you describe your relationship? Oh, this is my daddy. They call him daddy, or my boyfriend. And they think they're in love with these guys because initially they start out as what we call Romeo pimps. And then eventually, that switch flips and they become guerrilla pimps. And that's when the violence and the coercion and the threats. So ultimately, I'm working on a bunch of different bills. But for the big two trafficking, I would say the federal expungement and the state of Florida getting the nursing requirement reduced to intra-school days, not waiting till after they graduate.
You're involved with some initiatives like Resilience, Hope, and Healing Fund at FAU, and then Grandma's Angels. So
Sure.
We only have a couple minutes, so could you
Sure.
briefly describe what those are?
Sure. The social work one, which is the Resilience Fund, I'm sponsoring 10 students to stay here and hopefully, serve our mental health needs right here in Palm Beach County instead of fleeing, because a lot of them, it's just too expensive to stay here. Housing here is a big issue. So I've decided to give them stipends to entice them to get their master's here. And then for Grandma's Place, which is actually having their event in 2 weeks, feel free to share that with your audience if they want to come. It's an event that raises money every year, and I've done it now for 5 or 6 years being presenting sponsor, because it really takes care of our foster care youth and our special needs kids that are definitely at risk for trafficking if they haven't already been, abused. For them to be pulled out of their homes by DCF means they've already endured things that you and I don't want to imagine. So
that's wonderful. How can my listeners help, whether it's on a volunteer basis or financially, or how can people help this scourge we have in society?
Well, I would love for them to attend a Human Trafficking Coalition meeting. That doesn't require any money at all. They can listen in once a month. They have an online Zoom session to learn about trends and what's happening right here.
And that's the Palm Beach County Human Trafficking Coalition.
Yeah, Human
correct?
Trafficking Coalition, Palm Beaches. And then, and financially, I would love to see some people support the 16-bed housing project that's coming from Flight Center right here in West Palm Beach. We need everything from a garden to like actual things that would go into those apartments, because we're getting a bare bones grant, but at least it's something. To at least provide more beds, because ultimately the number one need for my housing, or for my victims of trafficking across every state that I've been to, is housing, unfortunately.
Well, thank you. I think we've run out of time. So
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Schaeffer. You've been amazing as usual, and it's been an honor to work alongside you for many years in the human trafficking area. And this is Craig Goldenfarb with the Gold Standard Radio Show with Dr. Heidi Schaeffer.
Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Gold Standard Radio Show. A huge thank you to our guests for sharing their incredible journey and for being a true beacon of excellence in our community. At Gold Law, we believe that when we lift others up, we all rise together. If you know someone in our community making a difference, someone who lives and breathes the gold standard, we want to hear about them. So please reach out, connect with us on social media, and let's continue celebrating the people who are shaping a brighter, stronger future for all of us in Palm Beach County. Until next time, I'm Craig Goldenfarb. So stay inspired, stay committed, and keep raising the gold standard.
Every day, 1,500 children in Palm Beach County wake up in foster care through no fault of their own. They have been torn from everything they know, facing fear, uncertainty, and unimaginable hardships. Many have suffered neglect, abandonment, or abuse, and now they must navigate a complex system that often falls short of meeting their needs. But they're not alone. That's where Speak Up for Kids steps in. We provide life-changing advocacy, life skills training, and essential resources to help these children heal, grow, and thrive. From educational support to everyday necessities, we bridge the gaps so they can have a future filled with possibilities. But we cannot do it alone. These children need champions, someone to stand in their corner, fight with them, and remind them they are valued and not forgotten. Will you be that champion? Visit www.speakupforkidspbc.org today and take action. Your support, whether through donating, volunteering, or simply sharing our mission, makes all the difference. Together, we can bring hope, stability, and a future to children who need it most. Don't wait. Take action now. Visit www.speakupforkidspbc.org and be the hero they deserve.